Hi there and welcome to my latest book haul, and just like last month's, this one is split between purchases and materials gifted to me by a professor in the department. I think we'll begin with my purchases. We start off with 3 sci-fi novels. Now, I've not reviewed many books from this genre for the channel, I think just one, Russell Hoburn's Ridley Walker a few months ago, but it was one of my passions when I first got into reading, and some of my favourite writers are practitioners of science fiction: Philip K. Dick, H.G. Wells, who we'll come on to in a second, Alfred Bester, and William Gibson. And we start off with a H.G. Wells classic, War of the Worlds. I read this a long time ago, and basically I picked it up this month because this edition is new and was almost being given away, so I'll reread that sometime this year. Then William Norris with his News from Nowhere, a Utopia. This came out in 1890, and I'm going to pair it when I do my reading of it with this. Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward. This is by an American writer and was published just 2 years before Morris's effort. Then one of my absolute favourites, J.G. Ballard with his The Unlimited Dream Company, and I've broken off from reading Mary Shelley's The Last Man and started reading this, and I think I'll have to finish this now before returning to Mary Shelley. And I'm just going to read you a quote from it because it's absolutely magnificent. It goes like this: "As the sun rose behind me, it seemed to overflow from the river, transforming the park and water meadow into a retinal bayou. Fish of every kind filled the water. Schools of roach and pike surged around the drowned Cessna, as if glutted on the residue of my dream. I strode through the trees, stretching out my arm to catch the brilliant motes. By the tennis courts I broke into a run, spurred on by the huge increase in illumination. The white marker lines hovered several inches above the clay, as if about to detach themselves from the court and take off across the sky, like the aerial matrix of a pilot's head-up display. Catching my breath, I leaned against a jacaranda tree, a strange visitor to this temperate park. The leaves were engorged with illuminated sap, each of the trumpet-shaped flowers a halo of itself. Deer moved through a copse of silver birch, cropping at the electric bark. When I shouted to them, their eyes twinkled at me, as if the entire herd had been fitted with contact lenses." Brilliant writing. And although this novel is relatively short, less than 200 pages, and the chapters are brief, I'm moving so slowly through it because everything here is arresting. It's so fresh and so vivid. It centers on a character, Blake, a young man who crashed a stolen Cessna into a river on the outskirts of London, and he's not actually sure if he's alive or dead, and he's having a series of extraordinary visions. What I just read you was the morning after one such episode. I'm going to review this in due course for the channel. Let's move on. Now, I must confess to knowing very little about the next 3 books I'm going to show you. They're Penguin classics, and the first 2 of these are going to point to a rather large gap in my reading because they are Tolstoy. First we have Resurrection. I don't know anything about this. In fact, the only Tolstoy I've read is his novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. So we'll see what this is like. And then more Tolstoy, Master and Man and Other Stories. And the cover here depicts Tolstoy himself ploughing. Then William Godwin, Caleb Williams. And again, I know very little about William Godwin, except he was extremely famous in his day as a radical. And he is, of course, the father of Mary Shelley, the author of perhaps my favourite novel, Frankenstein. Then another Penguin classic, Shakespeare's Sonnets and the Lover's Complaint. This I'm very happy to find. It's not been marked up with any notes. I do have a Shakespeare Sonnets here, the vintage edition, but the introduction here is only 8 pages or so long, whereas this one has a 50-page introduction. Wonderful. Then the last of my purchases is this, Hermann Hesse's Knolp, which I noticed is plunk backwards. I've read a little of it, and it seems rather similar to the work of Knut Hamsun, so I can't wait to get through this. It's very, very slim, just 100 pages or so. Okay, there are my purchases, Now let's move on to the materials that I was gifted. Now, why am I speaking of materials rather than books? It's because we have here 2 numbers of an academic journal, 18th Century Studies, this one from Summer 2020 and this one from Winter 2021. Now, there are 2 articles in here actually on Robinson Crusoe, another of my favourite novels. They're just interesting in their own right, but what this is also about is that within the next 3 or 4 years, I'm expected to produce writing of comparable quality and research of comparable depth, and so I can kind of use these articles as models, as inspiration for that. And then we have this curiosity, Discussions of Jonathan Swift. It's from 1962, and what it is, it's the opinions of great writers on the works of Jonathan Swift. So we have Samuel Johnson, Thackeray, F.R. Leavis, the great literary critic, W.B. Yeats, and George Orwell. It may come in useful one day, who knows? And to finish off, and I think this will be the most exciting part of this book haul, we have 5 books published by the Library of America. And if you're unfamiliar with their editions, what they do is take classic American writers and package together 3, 4, 5 or so of their works in a single volume, and they always run close to or over 1,000 pages in length. So here we have Eudora Welty. I've actually read the first novella in this, The Robber Bridegroom. It was absolutely wonderful. It's a retelling of a Brothers Grimm story, and it's set in the Deep South, and it blends in the folklore of Eudora Welty's birthplace. And I'm just going to read you a magnificently written section from this. What is the place and time? Here are all possible trees in a forest, and they grow as tall and as great and as close to one another as they could ever grow in the world. Upon each limb is a singing bird, and across this floor, slowly and softly and forever moving into profile, is always a beast, one of a procession, weighted low with his burning coat, looking from the yellow eye set in his head. He stayed and looked at the place where he was until he knew it by heart, and could even see the changes of the seasons come over it like 4 clouds. Spring and the clear and separate leaves mounting to the top of the sky, the black flames of cedars, the young trees shining like the lanterns, the magnolias softly ignited, summer and the vines falling down over the darkest caves, red and green, changing to the purple of grapes, and the autumn descending in a golden curtain. Then, in the nakedness of the winter wood, the buffalo on his sinking trail, pouring the ice till his forelock hangs in the spring, and the deer following behind to the salty places to transfix his tender head. And that was the way the years went by. But the time of cunning has come, said Clement, and my time is over, for cunning is of a world I will have no part in. 2 long ripples are following down the Mississippi behind the approaching somnolent eyes of the alligator, and like the tenderest deer, a band of copying Indians poses along the bluff to draw us near them. Men are following men down the Mississippi, hoarse and arrogant by day, wakeful and dreamless by night at the unknown landings. A trail leads like a tunnel under the roof of this wilderness. Everywhere the traps are set. Why? And what kind of time is this, when all is first given, then stolen away? And what struck me as so special about this writing was not just how beautiful that passage was, but the rest of the story is not told in that way. It just simply breaks out into that when required, just as we're approaching the climax of this wonderful tale. My goodness, what a fantastic writer Eudora Welty is. I can't wait to read the rest of this volume. I know I'm always saying I can't wait to read things. You'll just have to understand it's not a cliche from The Disappointed Man. It genuinely reflects my excitement about literature, about reading. So I'm absolutely delighted at coming into possession of these editions. Let me share the rest of them with you, and then it will be time for me to bid you farewell. So next we have Richard Wright, then Willa Cather. This one is particularly hefty. Theodore Dreiser, I think we pronounce it that way. And to finish this rather dashing gentleman, it's Frank Norris. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this book haul. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. And now, as promised, I will say my goodbyes. So, be safe, be strong, and I shall see you anon. Nanu nanu.